He lost the only job he ever truly loved because, one night, he refused to let a truck pass. 2 weeks later, the whole county gathered on his bridge, asking him to take the keys back. The keeper of the Pine River Bridge. Fog lifted off the water before dawn, settling like a quiet sheet between the steel trusses of the old bridge. Caleb Moore stepped out of his log cabin, carefully closed the door so as not to wake the raccoons hiding under the porch, and inhaled the damp, nearly icy air. It was 5:12 a.m. The cuckoo clock inside always ran 2 minutes fast, and Caleb had long learned to trust it like a fisherman trusts the tide. He pulled on his reflective vest, checked his pocket for the chalk pencil he used to mark new cracks in the metal, and climbed onto his cracked mountain bike. The 5-mile ride to the booth was muscle memory by now. The road to the river ran through a pine forest. You could hear the needles crunch under the tires like someone whispering secrets about what comes next. Above, a flickering utility light blinked every 5 seconds, and somewhere across the ridge, a diesel generator at the sawmill growled to life. Caleb knew the rhythm. When the generator fired up, it meant the dam keeper 2 turns south was setting on the morning pot of coffee. Time to get ready for the day. The first rays of sun pulled the steel skeleton of the bridge out of the fog. From the north bank, it always looked alive, like a creature stretching its ribs into the dark. Caleb leaned his bike against the concrete pillar, ran his hand along the cold railing. His morning ritual. His fingers found a fresh scratch. Yesterday, a flatbed truck had turned too sharply. He pulled out his chalk pencil, circled the mark, and added the date, August 13. The booth was no bigger than a raincoat laid flat, but it smelled like home. Ground coffee, old rags, peeling green paint. Caleb turned on the small burner, filled the chipped enamel kettle, and while it boiled, arranged the day. Weathered leather ledger, pencil, tin jar of change. Through the window, he spotted the first garbage truck crawling up the rise. Ollie from the northern site. Next would be Sheriff Langley's pickup, then the empty school bus heading for the depot. If anything broke that sequence, Caleb felt it in his bones, like a crack in a beam. He poured his first cup, took a sip, and held his breath. The fog shifted briefly, revealing a flashing beacon in the distance. A construction crew on the new highway segment. The orange stakes had moved closer to the bridge again. Caleb set down his coffee, closed the journal, and looked out over the river. Dark, wide, stubborn. He had always disliked the phrase, "the bridge is outdated." Bridges didn't age. They lived, like the river. And anything that lives deserves care, not demolition. He stretched slightly and something clicked in his back. Caleb frowned, hand on his hip, eyes scanning the opposite bank. Sometimes it felt like the bridge bent not just from weight and time, but from his own aging. Maybe it really is time to build a new one. The thought stabbed briefly. He pushed it away, but it lingered under his skin, like rust, barely visible, but already working its way in. At 5:59 a.m., the barrier lifted for the first time that day. Coins clinked in his hand. The sun broke over the pines. Caleb felt a light prickling in his chest. Maybe from the cold air, maybe from the sense that a regular morning on Pine River was about to end. And soon he'd stand watch, not for a paycheck, but for something more than just a road. By mid-April, the bridge's familiar rhythm developed its first crack. Instead of the yellow school bus that always opened the dawn queue, a silver SUV with an unfamiliar logo rolled up to the booth and idled in silence. 3 people in identical hard hats walked the railings, waved a laser tape across the rivets, snapped a dozen photos, and left without dropping a single word through the window. Their footsteps sounded as though they had already decided to scrub away the smell of coffee and rust, everything that meant home to Caleb. Later that same morning, another car arrived, a battered subcompact with a bright green hood. A woman of about 30 stepped out, wearing a jacket patched with County Historical Society. She carried a roll of film and a small camera on a strap. "Excuse me," she tapped on the glass, careful not to startle him. "Are you Caleb?" He nodded without standing. "My name is Serena. We're doing an exhibit on the county's forgotten places, old schools, the depot, and your bridge. May I take a couple of pictures? Outside, and, if possible, the booth?" Caleb shrugged, a little embarrassed. So long as it doesn't block traffic, he said. She walked the railings, clicked a few frames, one through the pane that caught a slice of his ledger. Then she paused at the corner and added, almost to herself, "It's beautiful in its own way. Feels like time slows down here." He said nothing. Yet long after she drove off, he stared at the tire tracks in the gravel. Amazing how one stranger's lens could make him see the bridge differently, not as a transit knot, but as the last living place on the map. The next day, the postman delivered a stiff envelope stamped with the county seal and a single dry line. Notice of transition to automated tolling. Inside lay a glossy brochure of a future overpass and a notice of personnel redundancy. A pair of businesslike paragraphs said it all. In 6 months, the booth would be unnecessary, and the man inside it in overhead. Caleb held the pages up to the window. The spring light passed through them like through thin ice. He set the envelope beside his weathered traffic journal and realized that even coffee rings left more warmth than those words. A week later, change roared in at midnight. A low metallic growl crept out of the bend. 3 unmarked heavy haulers clattered across the decking, each axle sagging beyond the limit line. The load limit sign quivered as if trying to dodge. Through the booth doors seeped a sharp chemical reek. Solvent, not diesel. Caleb jotted the license numbers, counted the axles, estimated weight, then chalk circled a fresh crack by a rivet and dated it. The white line on dark steel looked like a new scar. He knew more were coming. Daylight brought the inspectors back, now with a drone and tablets. The drone buzzed above the trusses, snapping shots, while the hard hats discussed an obsolete profile, never once stooping to the beam. Caleb stood in the bridge's shadow, finger on the chalk mark, feeling the dry metallic dust collect under his nail. His ledger gained a new entry. Drone. Specs not disclosed. Crack plus 4 millimeters. After they left, he walked the deck with a flashlight and saw the white line had stretched another centimeter. Late evenings, he reopened the battered road code, rereading the clause on unacceptable loads exceeding 20%. Every word matched his night notes, but the question remained, who in this county would challenge a company promising taxes and jobs? And what if he was wrong? What if everything he was doing was just a drop of grumbling in the ocean of progress? Maybe he simply couldn't bear to let go of the place he'd grown into, a place that still smelled of paint and coffee. The forester merely shrugged. The mailman advised, "Get used to new times." Meanwhile, the bridge creaked longer than usual, as if warning, pressure's rising. At the end of that day's entry, Caleb added 2 exclamation marks, rare in his neat hand. Something had shifted, unlikely to slip back. Orange stakes, heavy diesel, the official letter, the white crack. None of it felt accidental anymore. It was the beginning. The once fat notebook had served Caleb as a simple road calendar. Who crossed, what the weather was, how high the morning haze climbed. Now every page became an inspection report. Figures, arrows, the note, covert. He logged night plates, rough weight, counted axles by ear. Years on the bridge had taught him how overload hummed through the deck ribs. Fear he treated with habit. By day he stapled receipts, printouts, once a week, photos of cracks. At night off shift, he returned with a flashlight for measurements. Beneath the booth, an old seismograph was bolted to a steel frame. Its needle shook even at a breeze. But when semis crossed a span, it stabbed into the red. Caleb pulled the strip and marked the date. 1/4 sleepless night, he spotted an error. The date on the strip didn't match the entry. Wrong thumb drive. A trifle, yet his gut nodded. The whole stack of evidence balanced on details that small. He recopied the page, but unease lingered. Not fear of exposure, more a sting to his pride. He'd always thought himself meticulous. Now he wasn't sure. To each graph, he attached one photo only. The chalk line on the truss. Enough. More would drown the point. Piles of proof no one reads. The key was to leave a trace. Sometimes, sitting alone, he wondered, do I truly want this scene? Or am I just afraid of becoming unnecessary? The booth exhaled beside him, steady by day, wheezy by night. It seemed frightened too. On a mild May evening, he packed everything together. Span plan, graph, photo, the unsigned release form, into a tin box. Not because he knew the next step, but because he decided, let it exist. At midnight, headlights flared again. The needle swung right. Caleb wrote down a new date. The white line grew a little longer, and in him, so did something else. It happened the night of September 3rd to 4th. The bridge creaked in the wind as if sensing what was near. Caleb sat in the dark booth, drinking tepid coffee, waiting. According to the pattern, this would be the 10th convoy. A round number. He'd sworn, if a 10th came, time to act, or forever quit pretending he could change anything. At 003 came the rumble, then vibration. 3 sets of headlights around the bend. An unmarked column, dense as a wall. Caleb stood, his heart hammered unevenly. He opened the drawer, pulled out a heavy steel pin, rusty relic of pre-automation days, weighed it in his palm, put it back, then took it again. Maybe let them through, he thought. Pretend I didn't notice. Just sit. He exhaled, stepped to the barrier, slid the pin into the lock. The click was soft, but inside his head it cracked like a shot. No way back now. The semis stopped. One driver approached, rapped on the glass. Caleb didn't open. He pointed at the weight limit sign and at the white lines on the truss. 10 minutes later, a white Silverway car arrived. A man in an expensive suit spoke. Polite, but hard. The gist, open and keep your job, or stay closed and never come back. Caleb walked to the bridge edge, held up his journal. Not as a weapon, just the last page he still could write on. The trucks reversed and left. 40 minutes later, the sheriff arrived. He handed over a paper. Terminated for obstruction. No details, no discussion. Caleb removed his vest, laid it on the rail. Someone shoved his bike into the ditch. It slid into the weeds. At 4:40 a.m., the barrier lifted automatically. The booth stood empty. On the truss, a new chalk line appeared. March 3rd -barrier. Caleb went home, sat on his porch, and watched the river. It flowed like always. But something inside him trembled. Not from victory, but from the fact he dared. A week passed. The bridge lived on without Caleb. The barrier rose and fell blankly, as if breathing on command. The booth remained, but its windows stayed dark. No neatly aligned notebook labeled journal on the table. No chalk marks tracked the cracks. Caleb stayed away. Evenings, he locked his door and walked the riverbank, steering clear of the highway. He watched the water run its indifferent course, as if it never noticed that the bridge no longer belonged to him. Inside was a loss, quiet, sticky, like silt. What if none of it matters, he asked himself. If no one hears, does all I did dissolve like oil slick on the surface? One morning he found 2 letters in his mailbox. The first, official, rectangle envelope with the county crest. Notice of transfer to corporate management. From October 1st, the bridge would be fully controlled by Silverway Logistics. Inspections every 90 days, responsibility distributed among departments. No mention of Caleb's 17 years of load watch. Just a dry line. Object requires no staff involvement. The second was humbler. A yellowed envelope labeled in a child's scrawl, "To Mr. Caleb." Inside, a sheet torn from a school notebook. A kid had drawn the bridge. The river, a tiny booth with "Hi" on its window. At the bottom, block letters. "Mom says you stopped the truck so the fish wouldn't die. Thank you." Caleb held both letters, the 2 poles of one world, one machinic, faceless, the other from a time that still believed in simple deeds. His throat tightened, not from pride but surprise. He hadn't thought anyone would remember at all. He filed them separately. The child's note in the tin box with his chalk, the official letter under glass in the workshop among stripped bolts and warped washers. Not because one mattered more, each had its place. Who knew if anyone would need them? But he set them aside. Someday, perhaps. That evening he checked the river. Not for the bridge, for the water. Half a mile downstream, he found what he feared. In a back eddy once quick with trout, the surface was thick and oily, the bottom coated in dark green sludge. 2 dead bream lay on shore, one mouth agape as if calling out. He jarred a water sample, noted coordinates, temperature, Date. Back home, he photographed everything and sent the shots to the Department of Ecology from an anonymous account. No signature, no explanation. Just 3 attachments: photo, load graph strip, and a journal page. Subject line: delayed collapse, environmental risk, Pine River Bridge. He expected no reply. Yet 2 days later, a local news brief appeared. Anonymous leak suggests possible overload on Pine River Bridge and contamination of riverbank. Silverway declined comment. Hours after that, a man in a dark jacket, no badge, expensive shoes, left a plastic folder at his door and walked away. Inside, summons to a hearing for dissemination of confidential information and breach of prior contract. Caleb shut the folder, sat on the bench, watched fog settle over the river. No fear, only fatigue and a strange clarity. He had passed the truth on. Whether it would be heard was no longer his decision. September's heat broke suddenly. Gray veils rose over the valley and Pine River roared as if hurrying through the dark. The county station issued a storm warning, up to 8 inches of rain. But numbers meant little on an old steel span held together more by memory than bolts. Rain began as a hush. By midnight, became a solid wall. Electronic sensors on the new barrier flashed red. Inflow closed, useless against the elements. 2 miles upstream stood an old dam with manual gates, built the same era as the bridge, understood by only one man. Caleb sensed the distant water hammer at 1:30. Earth vibrated underfoot, the river shoving its banks. He acted at once, tossed a flashlight, wrench, and stick of chalk into a pack, rolled his ancient bike from the shed. The downpour drummed the spokes, the road a streaming creek, yet every yard was known. The wheels chose the rut by themselves. No one was at the dam. The digital panel blinked link fault, automation still not tied to the new control hub. Manual wheels rusted in the rain, but Caleb knew the turns to bleed pressure, right valve first, then left, or the surge would hit too hard. He braced, boots slipping, and cranked the slick metal. Pain ripped his back, deep, twisting. He grunted, stopped, pressed on, one hand working, one gripping the rail. Shoulders burned, palms slid. Between the 3rd and 4th spin, a gust tore off his hood so rain lashed his face. After the 7th turn, water beneath smoothed to a steady breath. Not an explosion, but a controlled exhale. Caleb collapsed to his knees, leaned on the guard, listening as the roar in his ears eased. By 4 a.m., the crest had passed. The river slammed the trusses but did not tear them. Foam rolled downstream. At dawn, a local radio drone rose above the water and streamed the first image. The old steel bridge stood intact, shining wet, while the new concrete spur farther down valley had cracked at its center seam. When the rain eased, Caleb walked the deck. The chalk line he'd drawn in summer still showed, faded but there. He ran a finger over the damp mark and added a new one. Date in the single word held. By noon, people gathered on the bridge. Farmers, anglers, even the Silverway techs who'd installed the sensors. They watched the river shrink back. No speeches. Someone lowered a hood, someone clutched a thermos. The roar gave way to silence, the kind where people understand without hurry. At the far end, an elderly fisherman Caleb knew only by face caught his eye and nodded. It was enough. Caleb looked away, yet inside he accepted the gesture. Someone had seen. In the hush after the flood, the bridge felt alive, breathing out after a hard night. It still creaked, but like calm, sure breathing. Everyone crossing the wet planks slowed, as if feeling the old structure's pulse. Caleb stood by the rail, sensing the effort hadn't been wasted. He pushed the thought aside, too soon for conclusions. Whether anyone would hear what the bridge tried to say remained unknown. The session convened in the county hall, walls painted cheap linen beige, chairs that squeaked at every shift. Caleb Moore hadn't set foot here in over 10 years. Back then, he'd collect insurance forms and sign annual bridge reports. Today, he came as the defendant. Dissemination of internal documents, breach of employment contract. He arrived early, wearing a faded work jacket with no patches. Inside sat Silverway reps, the county engineer, 2 lawyers with tablets, and an assistant with a recorder. Against the wall, Serena, historian, clutched a folder marked Pine River Oral History. Interview number 3. She nodded to Caleb. I'm here. The judge, a woman about 60 with a steady voice and tired eyes, read the charge. One lawyer added at once, Your Honor, the respondent deliberately blocked a federal class route, disrupted a logistics chain, and leaked proprietary data. Caleb didn't argue. He placed a slim folder on the table. Inside, copies of ledger pages, instrument graphs, photos of oil slicks, dead fish, and 2 printouts. One, a newspaper shot of the cracked spur downstream, the other, the child's drawing of the bridge. The lawyer scoffed. The judge looked up. Are you laughing at a child? She asked. Silence. Just then, a Department of Environmental Protection officer entered, holding a clear container. We ran analysis, he said. Hydrocarbons in the water were 7 times the norm. Likely cause, over-limit transport in August. Questions battered the Silverway delegate. He replied with vague references to unverified information. Serena raised her hand. Request to admit the interview recorded in April, where Mr. Moore describes early overload signs. That predates the conflict. The judge accepted the flash drive. Then she heard Caleb. He spoke quietly, stumbling yet firm, about chalk lines, night convoys, the wrenching pain when he cranked the dam. No excuses, no big words, just facts and weariness. By noon, the judge delivered the ruling. The contract was terminated without due process. The obstruction penalty is void. The leak charge dismissed. The data constituted a public safety warning. The bridge returns to county control. Continuous civilian monitoring required. Recommended guardian, one with local monitoring experience. Name already entered, Caleb Moore. Silverway's lawyers asked time to appeal. The judge nodded. You have that right. Caleb left the building empty-handed, head heavy. It didn't feel like victory. The bridge remained, but months of audits lay ahead. The same hard hats asking the same questions. The fight went on. Only the field had shifted. On the steps, Serena caught up. I still have the old tapes of you reading vibration data, she said, a bit out of breath. I think people ought to hear them. Caleb nodded. No broad smile, but relief flickered in his eyes. He glanced at the gray sky. The storm would leave, but rust stayed unless cleaned. He walked to the lot. In the distance, the bridge silhouette stretched like a dark thread over slow water. He didn't yet know how long the next stage would be, but stepping off the curb, he thought, the town heard, if only a whisper. For now, that's enough. Warm September light skims the water, coloring Pine River in copper and gold. The river runs steady as though nothing changed, and there's comfort in that. Splashes reach the bank. Trout have returned, if fewer than before. Fishermen nod quietly. No one promises better days, only tries to keep them from getting worse. The old bridge still stands. From the outside, it looks renewed, paint fresh, beams reinforced, yet inside everything's the same creak underfoot, the same chill that drips from metal at dawn. On the south truss, just below the parapet, a white chalk stripe remains. They never erased it. Caleb insisted. They coated it with clear sealant. Tourists miss it, but school kids sometimes ask. Someone touches the line, then falls silent. Caleb Moore is again at the bridge. Not as a hero, not even officially appointed. They simply never removed him. Keep watch for now. Paperwork later. He didn't argue. The booth survives, slightly widened by volunteers, new glass, a narrow desk. On it rests the old ledger, now with printed pages. Beside it, the kid's drawing, laminated, a little faded. Sometimes school groups visit. Some days no one comes, and Caleb sits alone, listening to the water, jotting notes. Someone began leaving smooth river stones in the tray where coins once fell, each chalked with a heart. There are 30-odd now. One has an arrow, another a tiny thanks. The stones don't arrive every week. Across the river in the former Silverway office, a small room, not a museum, just panels, shows Serena's exhibit. She asked for Caleb's records. He gave her most, kept some, just in case. In a case sit 2 vials labeled water then and water now. The difference shows if you look. Serena says little. She just displays. Locals drop by, glance in silence, leave. When the sun sinks behind the far ridge, Caleb walks to mid-span. He lays a palm on the steel angle. It trembles slightly, or maybe that's imagination. Chalk rests in his pocket, but he's in no hurry. The river flows. The bridge holds. Laughter drifts from teenagers behind him. One taps a heel on a plank, the sound hollow like a nod. Caleb turns, nods back, and heads to the booth, unhurried. The boards are warm from the sun, and the creek no longer frightens. It merely reminds him the bridge is alive. He never became a symbol, but he remained needed, and for now, that is enough. Sometimes to save a bridge, you need one person with a piece of chalk and a whole year to convince others that the river is worth every mark.